as of today, um, I I've been involved in a bunch of different activities. I spent 6 months helping um, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. work on his sequel to his real Anthony Fauci book. And once I came back from that, I've just continued to communicate through writing and in person with the different congressional committees that are investigating this. I spent 4 hours about a month or two ago sitting down with some Senate staffers since they're working on a new investigation in the Senate.
You're actually part of the federal investigation.
Um, not officially.
According to what you've studied, do you consider COVID to be a bioweapon?
I personally do believe that SARS-CoV-2 is the result of bioweapons research.
What does that mean for you coming from the military?
That means that somebody created this virus, and you can tell from the epitopes within the virus that this virus was designed to be able to do things in a combination that has never been seen before in nature.
Do you believe DOD, so Department of Defense, had a hand in the creation of COVID?
I believe that the methods that were used to create the virus, whether it was Ralph Barrick's chimeric construction methods or certain other gain of function techniques, arose from defense research. No question. American defense research. Our science was used by someone to create this virus, because not just our science, but our databases of viral sequences. So without American technology and methods and findings, this virus could not have been made. American military fingerprints are at least one of the many fingerprints that are on this virus. And even if it was China that produced it, China learned how to make this virus, at the very least, from American research.
So you said that because some of the research was made in very, very secret labs, US labs, it couldn't have gone out by itself. It had to have some military involvement.
Well, the military is always researching decades or a decade ahead of what's in the private sector. What I'm saying is that the military ultimately, Ralph Barrick received military funding. And so if he invented certain chimeric techniques, and all I know is that those techniques were used to create this virus. Alex Washburn and his co-authors, Tony VANDONGEN, and also VALENTIN BRUTTEL, the three of them basically discovered the evidence for this, that it was a chimeric virus. They showed that Ralph Barrick's techniques that were thought to be invisible, they actually discovered how to see this invisible stitching basically through the shadow that it left on the genome of the virus. It was very, very impressive. But what that was, is that was basically further proof that SARS-CoV-2 was developed using techniques that were also discussed in the DEFUSE proposal. So basically, a very important piece of evidence,
Yeah.
proving that the diffuse proposal wasn't just a proposal, it was something that they were actually doing.
Could you briefly summarize what is diffuse and how it links the virus to the army?
Yes. The diffuse proposal it's basically a blueprint to create a virus that looks exactly like SARS-CoV-2. Within the proposal, you have the same individuals who are already working on other grants that were already being funded. But there's a couple of additional steps that are proposed, and those steps include several key elements. The first is that they propose to very specific chimeric stitching together of different viruses. And then another thing they propose is to insert furin cleavage sites into a group of coronaviruses that have never had this before. Three, they also propose to look for certain regions of the viral genome that can facilitate a mechanism called DC sign, in which a virus can, it's basically another pathway that a virus can take to infect various cells throughout the body, in this case, immune cells. And when you put all of those elements together, all of those combined appear within the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And importantly, that is the first time in the history or the known history of virology that any virus of any kind has had all of these different elements together in one, and then stitched together using certain chimeric construction methods that are exactly the methods used by all of these scientists who are working on all these coronaviruses. So you have a watch, but you also have the signature of the watchmaker written inside the lid of the watch. And that's kind of a smoking gun. And so, as multiple Nobel Prize winners have stated, whether it was David Baltimore or Luc Montagnier, this is clear evidence of manipulation. That's why diffuse is so important, because it's not just an instruction manual to make SARS-CoV-2. It was an instruction manual written by the same scientists who are trying to cover it up.
How would that research on creating a new virus be of interest to the Army, to the US Army, and more specifically to DARPA?
Well, DARPA rejected the proposal, and I think that's important to state. But there's another one called the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, or DTRA, that does fund a lot of this research. And DTRA was one of I believe they're the largest single funder of EcoHealth Alliance. DTRA and then USAID, which is a well-known front for the CIA. What they were proposing, a bat vaccine, was using a lipid nanoparticle spike combination to create an aerosolized bat vaccine. And the specific line in the proposal said partial epitope coverage. And all that means is that you can't make a vaccine where you only use part of the virus, because then the immune response you get to that will inevitably drive the virus to further evolution. And once that happens, you can't know in what direction it's going to evolve. And more importantly, it was that same basic concept, same mechanism, that was then proposed in the mRNA jabs that were used. And so That's why the other reason they don't want to talk about it is because that undermines the scientific rationale for the mRNA vaccinations, period.
As you mentioned, some other agencies were more interested in this gain of function research.
Correct.
They
So,
have
yes.
been part of developing this virus.
Well, it's $100 billion industry globally in terms of public funding, public and private nonprofit funding for biomedical technologies. And 70% of that is controlled by the NIH. And so when you have such an amount of public funds that being distributed, the people who control those funds are incredibly powerful. And that person ultimately was Anthony Fauci, and who also happened to be the same person who was organizing the response to the pandemic and who had an incredible conflict of interest because he may have funded the research that led to it in the first place.
Could the firefighters also be the arsonists? Like, could some of those grants actually contribute to developing COVID?
Well, that is the overarching belief of those of us who have been researching this now for several years. And that's exactly the case. You would never put the fox in charge of the hen house. And yet that's exactly what we've done. And during the pandemic, it was made worse because we gave the fox the keys, and then we allowed the fox to censor dissenting opinion. And then we also allowed the fox to control the funding for any therapeutics or anything in response to that same thing.
And of course, the fox in this case would be Anthony Fauci.
The evidence would suggest that that is correct.
Can you explain what is DRASTIC?
Well, DRASTIC is a group of scientists and researchers from 4 different continents who met and organized on Twitter very early on in the pandemic. There's geneticists, microbiologists, data analysts. I'm one of the only members that isn't a scientist, but my background happens to be military in weapons of mass destruction. And so each of us individually and as a group, we've continued to work researching into more depth each one of those different areas. So the censorship, sequences, the epidemiology, etc. But then in September of 2021, the thing we're most known for was the release of the DEFUSE proposal. And because of my work with DRASTIC, a whistleblower reached out to me. His name is Major Joseph Murphy. I had never met him. He was an infantry officer, or is an infantry officer, who commanded a company in Afghanistan in like 2015 or 2016. And he was a very highly regarded officer. And because of that, he was awarded a presidential fellowship to work at DARPA for a year. And he had found on the highest classification server that exists in the United States, a copy that was clearly intended to be hidden from the public, a copy of this proposal from EcoHealth Alliance to DARPA. And so after much deliberation, he and I decided to leak those documents, and we chose to do it through DRASTIC. The main reason that he was never prosecuted for leaking documents is because the DEFUSE proposal was not classified. So on all classified documents, it's a requirement, as you guys know, that it's marked as classified.
Mm-hmm.
But what made these documents so unusual is that they were on a top secret TSSCI server, but they were not marked. Anytime a document gets put into a safe or it gets put into a classified network, it's put into a logbook. And that log includes the date, it includes the person who said this is classified, what the classification is. And so it's illegal. What they did is that they didn't want a trail of evidence to show who put it in there or why. That is illegal.
So it wasn't logged. It was in the file, but it wasn't logged.
That's correct. Whoever put them there was trying to hide them. And the person who put them into the classified database broke the law. And they did not want to expose whoever that was or the details of that. There's no record. I mean, whoever, the NSA and the CIA, they know who put those files into that file folder on the classified network. But that information is classified. So the person, so it was an incredibly brave decision nonetheless, because Joe, I call him Joe, Joe knew that this document would never be seen by the public ever unless it was leaked. But he also knew that it was wrong for the document to be there in the first place. And so before he leaked those documents, he filed a whistleblower complaint. He did all the right things, but after he did all the right things, he made the decision that the public had to see it. It was too important. He was talking to attorneys about whether or not he would get in trouble if he leaked these documents, because he's a father of 2 young children. He's married, and he would have gone to prison for the rest of his life. And so we took great care. I mean, to this day, there's certain aspects of the leaking that I don't talk about because I want to make sure that he's protected. And the other key note that I've tried to highlight is that in May of 2021, President Biden ordered the Director of National Intelligence they had 90 days to produce a report that covered what was known to the intelligence agencies about the origin of COVID up to that point. And it was during that 90-day window that someone took these documents and hid them in that file, because we know the date that they were deposited. And so what that means is that on August 25th or 27th of 2021, the Director of National Intelligence issued their report, the so-called Biden report on the origin. And I knew that the day that released, that it was a lie to the American people, because I was holding in my hands the evidence that they knew much more than they were talking about, and nonetheless were hiding it from the American people. So I knew that my own government was lying to me because I held the proof in my hands. The DEFUSE proposal is proof that the American intelligence apparatus was lying both to the president and to the American people about the origin of COVID.
Which means that the cover-up is running very deep. It's not just the Peter Daszak and the NIH. It's running much, much deeper into a much wider network of civil servants. And
that's correct. And that's why when people talk about the DOD, I think of it as, it's not just the Department of Defense. To me, this is more of an intelligence cover-up. Because Anthony Fauci was working with the Department of Defense. He was working with intelligence agencies. It's just easiest to refer to it as the deep state, because that's really what it is. This is an intelligence cover-up, first and foremost.
And so was Peter Daszak. During the hearings, he was questioned about his link to the
CIA.
CIA.
And ironically, and once again, my friend Andrew Huff and I were sitting directly behind, right next to his lawyers. And it was Andrew who had already under oath stated that EcoOath Alliance was working with the CIA, as his boss, his former boss, was trying to, dissimulate, prevaricate. trying not to answer the question to Congress.
Yes.
But Congress already knew this because Andrew was literally sitting right there and had already publicly stated under oath that that's what was happening. So yes, I do think that Peter Daszak is going to go to jail because he's lied to Congress multiple times. But at the same time, I think he is a scapegoat that they're using to try and divert attention away from the intelligence agencies. That's ultimately what's happening. Yeah. But Major Murphy is still on active duty in the military for a couple more years. The DOD does not want him to testify. But the good thing is that I can testify under oath. I'm a disabled veteran, but I'm not in the military anymore. They don't have any control over me. And I worked directly with Major Murphy to leak the documents. So I know the whole story because I can testify under oath to everything that I've just told you. And I think that's the most direct way to get this truth out there. But that will absolutely not happen as long as President Biden is president, because of course his son, people don't know this, but the investigations have already been done. His son was used as a go-between. He was placed on the board of Burisma in Ukraine, specifically to funnel approximately $7 billion directly to Eastern Ukrainian oligarchs to fight in the proxy war since 2014. That's the real reason that Hunter Biden was there. And Hunter Biden was also investing in Metabiota, which was directly involved with EcoHealth Alliance. And with multiple bioweapons labs in Ukraine. So the West has a lot of reasons. There's so many ties between Ukraine and the pandemic, which of course just makes the Ukraine war a great excuse to not have to dig up any of that stuff. It was French scientists who created the labs in Wuhan, just like German scientists, public health scientists, and universities were also involved in funding and in this type of research in China. And so were the British. And so were the Americans. So the West, it doesn't matter what country you are part of. If you're part of the West, your governments have lied to you. They have manipulated you. They have funded all this work in a collaborative effort using your money, censored so that way you didn't know that it was your money that was used to create this virus, took away your freedoms, and now they're still working to do it again.
In fact, the cover-up is the story, because
that's right.
If they need to cover up something, they have something to hide.
Of course.
Of course. I mean, I don't know how you protest it. I don't know if there's, I've read about the people organizing to poop in the Seine as protest. So I don't know what we can do to protest, but we need to figure out some clever way to draw attention to it, because the pandemic is not over. If you lost a loved one to COVID or to a vaccine, or if you yourself have had autoimmune diseases or some cardiac problem, then you're a victim. And unfortunately, a lot of people are victims and they just don't know it. We need to expose the truth to the public all around the world. Because once the public has that information, whether it's the origin, or the vaccine or whatever, once they know what happened, and the more they know about what happened, the more we will be able to hold all of these people accountable. Science has betrayed the public's trust.
Yeah.
And the only way that we can ever hope to heal what has happened is to let the public know what happened and allow them to direct the conversation forward. And yes, what does that likely means that there's going to be a massive backlash against science. There's going to be a massive backlash against public health professionals and against doctors. But it has to happen for justice to occur, because millions of people have been killed.
Yeah.
Millions of people are dead that did not have to die. And whatever we believe about, the vaccines or anything else, what we want is justice for the victims of this tragedy and to ensure that it never happens again. And right now, if nothing else, if we can't expose this, we're on a path that will lead to millions more people dying, and we have to stop that at all costs. That's my priority. When I go to sleep at night, that's what keeps me awake. And that is my goal. And that's why even now it's been 4 years, I'm still fighting, and DRASTIC is still fighting. We're still talking about all these things, investigating, because we know that at all costs, we have to stop this from happening again.
Where can we find the DRASTIC documents? Did you post them online?
I'll send a link to, if you're referring like to our analysis of the diffuse proposal, or
All the research that the DRASTIC group has done.
oh,
Did you post everything in one place?
actually, yes. I have everything that every member of DRASTIC has written, a link to all of those things. And another tab is a list of our major findings and accomplishments. And all of that is already public. It's on ResearchGate, but I can send a link through your BAM